Hi. It's good to see all of you here this afternoon. Join us for this event. We thank you very much for taking time to come over. I think we've got something that's going to be very interesting to share with you all today. My name is Scott Schaefer, and on behalf of the Department of Recreation, Park, and Tourism Sciences, I welcome you all to Managing Our National Parks the Next 100 Years. Some of you in the room know, many of you probably know, that the National Park Service celebrated its centennial in 2016, so we're into its second century. And we have some gentlemen here who you're going to hear more about in a few minutes who will share their experiences from the past and how they're feeling about the future. And so we're really looking forward to that. This is a really cool thing, y'all, because these folks have come from all corners of the country to be here. They represent a wealth of experience. They are literally pillars of the Park Service and of service to our country. So you're going to see something really special here. Let me tell you sort of how things are going to go. I'm going to turn it over in a second to Dr. Gill. She's going to offer some words of welcome from the college. Then Lavelle Merritt, Dr. Merritt's going to come up. He's going to introduce these gentlemen to you one at a time, give you a little bit about their background. They're going to make their presentation, and then we're going to have some Q&A, some question and answer session after that. We'll see how we're doing on time, but please make note of your questions and take them down mentally or take them down on paper, whatever you want to do. We are then, after we've had some Q&A, we're going to adjourn. There's a reception that's planned afterward. Please plan to stay and join us. We got some good food, opportunity to take photographs with these guys. I'm sure they'd all love to line up and give you autographs and all kinds of good stuff. So it's an opportunity just to socialize informally, right? So again, we're glad you're here. I will now turn it over to Dr. Gill. Dr. Claire Gill is the Executive Associate Dean for the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Dr. Gill, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dr. Schaefer. Howdy. On behalf of Dr. Patrick Stover, the Dean and Vice Chancellor of the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, it gives me great pleasure to introduce this event today, the presentation and discussion of the second 100 years of the National Park Service. As you were all coming in, they were playing a video, and I was just reflecting on all the fantastic family memories that I have from being in your national parks, either camping or hiking, whether it be Big Bend or elsewhere in the country. In this College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, we're really proud of the contributions that our students and former students, our staff and faculty are making as we strive to reach every Texan and create positive global change through our land-grant mission of teaching, research and service. Today, as I introduce this event, I'd particularly like to acknowledge the contributions of students and faculty in the Departments of Recreation, Parks and Tourism Sciences, Wildlife and Fisheries Sciences, and Ecosystem Science and Management in support of resources like national parks and protected areas in the United States and around the world. Whether it be through the collaborative Pro-Ranger partnership with the National Park Service, and I see a few of you here today, that recruits and trains law enforcement park rangers, that is managed by RPTS, or through high-impact experiences in our national parks as students learn about management of natural and cultural resources associated with conserving our parks, or through our faculty's social and behavioural sciences research, or research in ecology and conservation biology. Our college has really broad and lasting impact in parks and other protected areas because of you all. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy the event today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gill. It is my great pleasure to have this opportunity to introduce our distinguished guests that we have with us today. My name is Dr. Lavelle Merritt. I'm obviously a National Park Ranger. I've had the pleasure of working here in this department, Recreation, Parks, and Tourism Sciences, for a number of years and graduated from Texas A&M and earned my PhD here. Every once in a while we get to do something that we kind of have to pinch ourselves, like, wow, do I really get to do this right now? These gentlemen have really been really inspirational to me as a ranger, as a person entering this great career, that I had the opportunity to introduce them. Each one of them has in some way touched me. in a positive manner to make me just really embrace who we are in the National Park Service. So first, I'm going to introduce read his bio, Mr. Robert G. Stanton. He was the former director of the National Park Service. He was very instrumental in making many changes in the National Park Service for the better. Mr. Stanton, Dr. Stanton, was born in Fort Worth, Texas. He grew up in Mosier Valley, one of the oldest African-American communities in Texas, settled by free slaves. He earned his Bachelor's of Science degree from Houston-Tilliston College in Austin in 1963. He took his first job in the Park Service in 1966. He's been superintendent of Virgin Islands in St. Thomas. He was a deputy regional director of the Southeast region. He was also deputy regional director of the National Capital Region. Dr. Stanton has moved the Park Service in such a positive manner throughout his career, and he currently continues to be an advocate for our national parks. He's also an adjunct professor here at Texas A&M. He continues to promote his lifelong interest and really has just made such a substantial contribution to who we are in the National Park Service. Another person I'd like to introduce, read his bio, is Mr. Anthony Vela. He was one of my Pro Ranger students way back when, in like 2010. He was brought to me by his father, David Vela, when I was in San Antonio. Anthony was also a graduate of the Recreation, Parks, and Tourism Sciences Department. He's been in a United States Park Ranger since 2011. He has worked in several units, including Grand Teton, Everglades National Park, Big Cypress National Preserve. He currently serves, as I mentioned, as a Chief Ranger in St. Augustine, Florida. He works in law enforcement, emergency medical services, program, also fire, special use programs, and in other park units. Anthony has a wonderful family who's here with us today. He has beautiful children. His wonderful wife is here with us as well. And of course, the Vela family is here to be with us as well. And we're happy to have them with us. Also, I'd like to introduce Mr. J.T. Reynolds. J.T. started in the National Park Service after his junior year while majoring in recreation and park management. He minored in wildlife sciences at Texas A&M and Texas A&M University. He was one of the first African Americans that played on our football team. JT became superintendent of Death Valley National Park in 2001, and one of JT's accomplishments was enhancing the park's efforts to support youth. JT has retired in 2009, but he continues to serve in a lifetime service, volunteering on several councils and boards. And JT is also currently instructor in several Las Vegas school systems. He helps to bring the next generation into the work that we do, conserving public lands, being assets to our nation. And then finally, but of course not least, I would like to introduce and read his bio, Mr. David Vela, a graduate of Texas A&M University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Recreation and Parks. He graduated also from the U.S. Department of Interior as a senior executive service candidate, May 2006. He began his career in the National Park Service in 1981 as a cooperative education student at San Antonio Missions National Historical Park in Texas, and later became a law enforcement park ranger there. In 1984, he transferred to the courthouse. I'm not even gonna try it. Appomattox. I'm trying to read it. Appomattox Courthouse, National Historic Park in Virginia, to serve as a supervisory park ranger. 2 years later, he moved to Independence National Park in Philadelphia as a district ranger. He was a special agent for the Department of Health and Human Services, and he was also a special counsel for an assistant to Hispanic Affairs to late Representative George Thomas Mickey Leland of Texas. He was a federal investigator. In 1996, the state attorney general appointed David Vela, director of Texas Child Support Programs, where he supervised more than 70 field offices and 2,400 employees. Mr. Vela returned to the National Park Service in 1998 as superintendent of Palo Alto National Historical Site. He became the Texas State Coordinator here in Texas, and after a stint of superintendent in LBJ National Historical Park, where I had the pleasure of working for him when he brought me here to earn my degree, David Vela then transferred to George Washington Memorial Parkway in Washington, D.C. Mr. Vela is the current Deputy Director of Operations of the National Park Service. He and his wife and children are here. Christina and Anthony, and their 4 grandchildren. This phenomenal NPS leader will be sharing with us, these leaders will be sharing with us their life experiences, their current work, and how they see the transformation of the National Park Service into the 2nd century of public land management. Now, we're going to show a short video about the people that serve in our national parks and what we hope to see in the future of conservation, protecting these most beautiful, most cherished places. Much like this beautiful audience, we're going to see what makes America beautiful.
Yeah, we're beautiful. America's best idea. The greatest of America's natural landscapes, our revered cultural heritage, and our most important historical lessons. A mosaic of what we Americans value about our places, ourselves, and each other. We serve as guardians of many of our nation's greatest treasures, and the tellers of our collective stories. We honor the best of who we are as a nation and seek lessons in our country's imperfections. Our role is not to define for others, but to inspire discovery, to question our assumptions, to uphold our nation's democratic principles, and to challenge each other to rise above what was and achieve the ideal of what can be. So, who are we? And what do we believe about ourselves? Ours are the faces of many peoples, the bearers of many identities. We are public servants, fiercely dedicated public servants. And we believe in the power of our mission. We see how our work connects to the greater good. We are passionate about what we do. We are courageous. We welcome challenges. We strive to create opportunities for everyone to connect with their parks. We support local communities. We are stewards. We are family. We are ambassadors. We are all of this because we believe that we did not inherit, but we borrow from our future. Yeah, we are beautiful. America's best idea. But is believing in who we are enough? Are we connecting with the next generation? Do we learn from our own diversity? Have we truly ensured that all people feel invited, included, and engaged? Can we risk not meeting the needs of an increasingly diverse America? To be America's best, we need to go out and invite new audiences. Share the difficult stories. Meet the needs of an ever-evolving society. Confront our discomfort. Realize that many people value our mission as much as we do. Harness the power of our own diversity. Seek opinions different than our own. Really listen. Be willing to implement new ideas. Be flexible. Build meaningful connections with others. And embrace change as an opportunity to learn and grow. Relevancy, diversity, and inclusion are pillars, They are values and practices for connecting the public to our mission and fulfilling our obligation to steward our nation's natural and cultural heritage. Discussing and debating these values embodies our democratic ideals and strengthens our role in society. Listen, share, join in the discussion. We're all in this together. We are the National Park Service.
Good afternoon. Howdy, I like that. To Dr. Gill, to Professor, Dr., Department Head, Dr. Scott, to the former Department Head, Dr. Ellis, Dr. Lavelle Merritt, to the distinguished, honorable Vela family, you honor us with your presence, and to my distinguished colleagues on the panel. But I say my warmest greetings for you, the students. You honor us with your presence, your participation, and your interest. Dr. Scott and Dr. Lavelle Merritt asked, no, they didn't ask, they said, Bob, you will be first. I'm without portfolio, so I couldn't deny and reject. But I simply told them I would exercise those two innate characteristics for which all native Texans are known. Simply this, humility and brevity. And they said, Bob, that's fine, but let's have brevity first, so I will be brief. I'm up to yield the balance of my time because I too want to hear about the next 100 years. But I thought it might be appropriate as I reflect on some 40 years of being associated, actually 57 if we were to include my beginning as a seasonal ranger in Grand Teton National Park. But cumulatively, looking at all those experiences, to offer for your consideration perhaps a philosophical framework in which we can look at the next century of the National Park Service and the preservation of the rich and diversity of the National Park System and other associated programs and resources. This week we are celebrating what is known as Constitution Week, a document that has served us as a people, as a nation, extremely well since 1788. And I have drawn somewhat of a parallel between what has occurred with the Constitution, that which has occurred with our National Park Service and the park system. When the Constitution was ratified, and with the preamble including that most beautiful, all-inclusive pronoun, beautiful pronoun, we. But that was not true. By design, my ancestors were not included in the we. American Indians were not included in the we. Women were not included in the we. But those who drafted that document recognized that it had flaws. It had deficiencies, but they did have enough gumption, good Texas expression, to include in Article 5 a provision in which that document could be amended to try to move towards that declaration that we make in the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, that there had to be some changes made to move towards an inclusiveness within that beautiful pronoun we. So on reflection, that Constitution has not only been amended 10 times towards moving towards a more perfect union, not 15 times, not 20 times, but I believe 26 times. And the 26th Amendment, I believe, spoke specifically to many of you in the audience. You now can exercise the right to vote at the age of 18. Then fast forward to the National Park System. Later on, the National Park Service and the Park System. The National Park Service had an Organic Act, August 25, 1916. And the American people could just stop with what that act provided for, was to manage national parks. The national parks grew from Yellowstone in 1872 up to the 419 areas, as will be discussed in more detail later on. So in a real sense, the national park system has been amended. It has grown to reflect the interests and the needs of the American people. There are areas within the national park system that reminds us that we have made some grievous mistakes in our life. I am pleased that those areas have been added to the national park system, and other areas have been added to the park system, because these areas that reflect or preserve or commemorate some of our difficult chapters in our collective history are places that represent a maturing on our part as a people and as a nation, and becoming adults, if you will, or a more reasoned nation. We publicly recognize our mistakes with the objective that we can learn and not repeat. The noted historian who served as the chairman of the Park System Advisory Board when I was the director, the late preeminent historian Dr. John Hope Franklin, would remind us that places such as Sand Creek Massacre, Manzanar, Selma to Montgomery, Tuskegee Airmen, Brown versus Board of Education, Little Rock Central High School, Women's Rights Historical Park, making some difficult chapters. Obviously the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, Spanish-American War, are not places in which we should wallow in remorse, but rather be moved to a higher resolve to become better citizens. The bottom line, my friends, in terms of the future, is to embrace the notion that the cumulative natural and cultural resources preserved for this and future generations to benefit. The bottom line is, out of all the experiences, are we better citizens? Are we better citizens? I will close with a couple of observations. I'm a product of segregated Texas, harshly segregated Texas. And those experiences influence how I look at and value diversity and inclusion. But it also, out of those experiences, have come a conclusion that technologically speaking, we can do almost anything that we set our minds to do. I remember a young president, I believe at Rice University in 1961 or 62, declared that we will commit ourselves to send a person to the moon within this decade and return him or her safely to Earth. And I think we did it within 7 years. But within that period of time, I could not enter a cafe where my mother was a short order cook because I was a Negro, a colored, an African American. Something's wrong with that picture. Something was very wrong with that picture, which tells me that technologically, we can advance as much as we want to. But if we don't have the will to do what is right, we will not make as much gains as we should. And certainly that was so vivid as my contemporaries attempted to enter Little Rock Central High School in 1957, when the Supreme Court had declared that we find unanimously in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. And one would have thought, here is the highest court of the land declaring that. Did we have the will to do that? No. It took President Eisenhower to provide military protection of 9 of my peers to exercise their right to enter the front door of Little Rock Central High School. So in essence, I have concluded in my own mind, if we are to preserve Big Bend, Big Thicket, LBJ, other areas within the national park system in the state of Texas, I believe there are now 13 parks. It's not that we cannot care for the historic properties or manage the natural wildlife and preserve their habitat, or that we cannot accommodate visitors through all kinds of audiovisual presentation, digitalized presentation, et cetera, et cetera. The technological advances are there to do this. The real quest, the real challenge of preserving these parks well into the 21st century is the will of the American people to be the best stewards of these fragile resources. That will rest with us individually and collectively. And I want to challenge you, and I want to salute you in the words of one of our greatest conservationists, a lady whose legacy is preserved and memorialized in Grand Teton National Park. I had the opportunity to meet her when I was a seasonal some 57 years ago. She was the first woman to graduate from University of Alaska. She was a co-founder of the Wilderness Society. She made this comment, and fairly frequently, and I will just share this with you and challenge you with this. My father once told me, if you take one step, just one step, with all the knowledge you have, the knowledge that you are gaining here at Texas A&M University, if you just take one step with all that knowledge you have, you generally will find at the end enough light to take the next step. I pledge to you, I am prepared to take that next step with you. Have the will to join with your National Park Service to preserve these irreplaceable resources known as your national park, heritage area, wild and scenic rivers. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I am confident that the next 100 years are in good hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Stanton, Dr. Merritt, Dr. Schaefer, the rest of the RPTS faculty and staff. Thank you all for coordinating such an amazing and historic event. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anthony Vela, and I'm currently the Chief Ranger at the Castillo de San Marcos and Fort Matanzas National Monuments in St. Augustine, Florida. I'm also a proud graduate of the Fighting Texas Aggie class of 2010. I am truly humbled and honored to be a part of this historic event and to have the opportunity to share the stage with these distinguished speakers. Each of these leaders have paved the way and continue to do so in the protection of our nation's most cherished resources. It is a result of their leadership and selfless dedication to the mission of the National Park Service that I am able to stand on the stage today. As a young kid growing up in Austin, Texas, the home of that other school, I was immersed in the culture of the National Park Service at a young age. I saw my dad get dressed each morning and put on his uniform with a great sense of pride. Little did I know that one day he would lead the very organization that he has served for nearly 30 years. I always knew I would attend Texas A&M. It is, after all, a family tradition. My mom and dad both graduated class of 1982, and my sister class of 2006. You could say I didn't have a choice. I knew from a very young age that not only did I hope to attend Texas A&M, I wanted to play there. As a high school student, I wasn't heavily recruited by many schools to play football, and after declining a few offers to play at smaller schools, I was accepted at Texas A&M and attempted to walk onto the football team. After a grueling week of tryouts, I learned that I was cut from the roster and wouldn't be on the team for the 2007 season. I was truly devastated. Not making the team that year was a bitter disappointment. I was determined to not give up, and I worked twice as hard to make the team, surrounded myself with passionate people who pushed me to be my best each and every day. This experience taught me the value of determination and the will to succeed. I tried out again for the 2008 season and made the team. I went into training camp that year, fourth on the depth chart at fullback, and was eventually named the starter for the 2008 season. I was fortunate to play my remaining career alongside a couple Aggie greats that you might remember, Gerard Johnson, Vaughn Miller, and Ryan Tannehill. My football experience taught me that no matter what challenges you're faced in life, do your absolute best and make the most out of the opportunities you're given. As I was entering my senior year in college, I didn't really have the next step figured out, as some of you may relate. As a minor in RPTS, I was exposed to the many facets of our public lands and received tangible experiences of what it would be like to one day work in public service. I remember being in a class taught by Professor Susan Scott and was assigned a project in support of the Trails and Rails program. Our task was to research, develop, and submit an audio-recorded interpretive message for a portion of a train ride that would eventually be heard by the visiting public. I was nervous, and this was my first experience with interpretation, but the skills that I learned in that course still serve me to this very day. During the course of my studies, I met Dr. Lavelle Merritt. Dr. Merritt was launching a brand new program called Pro Ranger. This program comprised of a year of rigorous coursework, followed by a paid summer internship in a national park with the goal of one day attending a seasonal academy. I applied to that program, was fortunate enough to be accepted, and thus began my journey into the National Park Service. I spent the next year participating in the program and learning about the history of the National Park Service and all of the many opportunities that one could have as a law enforcement ranger. At the conclusion of that year, it was time to learn where we'd be sent to our first summer internship. I opened the email and saw the words, Grand Teton National Park, located in Moose, Wyoming. Now, this Texas native was understandably nervous about being sent to a city named Moose, much less a place thousands of miles away with no Whataburger in sight. I was even more shocked when I read the housing description. I believe it read something along the lines of, you'll be in a remote environment with no cable, no internet, in the middle of the woods, and oh, by the way, 4 strangers will be your roommates. Nevertheless, I packed my belongings and headed out west. Little did I know this would be one of the best experiences of my life. I arrived at the park and instantly fell in love. Seeing the Teton Mountain Range in all its glory changed me at my core. I was exposed that summer to many job functions that were afforded to rangers in Grand Teton, from leading guided hikes along Taggart Lake to becoming a certified driver for the park ambulance to conducting patrols with the law enforcement rangers. The experiences that I had that summer lit a fire inside me, and I knew that this was the career that I wanted. As I was finishing my internship and poised to return to Texas, I met a new neighbor moving into the cabin next door who was beginning her own park experience as a part of the Teacher Ranger teacher program. I stopped in and asked if she needed help moving a few of her belongings. And little did I know she'd one day become my wife. Fast forward 10 years, and now we have 2 amazing sons, Nathaniel and Gabriel, who are living up and growing in a national park themselves. The Pro Ranger program and the experience that I had that summer laid the foundation and shaped my beginnings as a United States Park Ranger. As we look toward a second century of service, we must first look back and reflect upon the issues that we have faced the last 100 years. Understanding these challenges and opportunities will allow us to chart our path forward in the next century of service. I believe one of the biggest challenges that we will continue to face is managing the increased visitation and the impact that it will have on our resources, our facilities, and our employees. National parks are more popular than ever. With that brings a host of challenges that we need to be fully aware of to ensure that we are capable of addressing them. For example, how do we manage increased traffic flow and the capacity of our parking facilities? How do we manage the increased amount of trash that is generated from these very visitors? And are we prepared and adequately staffed to address these issues? As we embark upon a second century of service, we must be willing and adapt to the changing times while continuing the values and principles that have served us so well the last 100 years. There are 4 tasks that come to mind when I look at how we can best preserve and protect our national parks in the second century. First and foremost, we must utilize the advances in technology and place a direct focus on the value of gathering intelligence. The law enforcement profession is continually evolving. New and emerging technology is becoming increasingly available and used in law enforcement activities. We must leverage these technological advances and utilize them to our advantage. To meet the challenges and threats that we face both home and abroad, we must boost our intelligence capabilities and ensure that field staff have the information they need to be successful. Our state and local law enforcement partners are invaluable assets on this front, and it's incumbent upon us to continue to foster those interagency relationships and work together to keep our community safe. Second, we must ensure that our training and equipment is adequate and relevant. The training that Rangers receive today is vastly different than what was taking place 20 years ago, as your next speaker could attest to. Today's Rangers receive over 650 classroom hours of their training in the Seasonal Law Enforcement Academy. They will then receive upwards of 700 hours at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, followed by a 12-week field training program. These academies lay a solid foundation to ensure that our workforce is fully capable and equipped to safely and execute their duties on a daily basis. This training, however, can't stop at the conclusion of the academy. Gordon Graham, a world-renowned speaker in the law enforcement community, has coined the phrase, "Every day is a training day." As law enforcement rangers, we must continually strive to better ourselves both personally and professionally every day. Third, the law enforcement rangers patrolling our parks must represent the public that they are entrusted to serve. We must work strategically to recruit and retain a workforce that is capable of tackling the issues ahead of us. As managers, we need to place an emphasis on mentoring and growing our employees to ensure they are effective and efficient in all Ranger skill sets. The Pro Ranger program is invaluable to this mission. It offers the opportunity to target, recruit, and mold the next century of our law enforcement rangers. And lastly, we must ensure that our employees' physical and mental health needs are addressed. Our employees are our most valuable resource. Every management decision and operational action should be geared toward employee safety and must be driven by the principles of operational risk management. As future leaders of the National Park Service and of our public lands, I'm encouraged by each of you and your willingness to address these issues head on. As you begin your careers in public service, utilize the skills and knowledge that you will gain from your education and the experiences that you'll have on this campus. Live out the Aggie Honor Code and make the most of every opportunity you're given. In closing, I'd like to leave you with a quote from the early 1900s that still reigns true to this day. This quote should continue to guide us as we embark upon the second century of stewardship of our national parks. Do not let the service become just another executive government bureau. Keep it young, vigorous, clean, and strong. Horace Albright, Second Director of the National Park Service. Thank you.
Testing. I'll say gig 'em again. Gig 'em. My message, how do all of us support the National Park Service? Or for all that matters, how do we support Mother Earth? And I will try to share that when I tell you the story about the making of JT. I too grew up in the segregated South, Galveston, Texas. I graduated from Texas A&M in 1969. So, whoop, there's another young fella right there. So if you do the calculations, you might be able to guess my age. If you're still in the department, I see one of my old professors who's still here. I love him to death. I'm glad to see that he's still here supporting. But the making of JT was all about supporting youth. And I think that's how the next century will be supported. Growing up in Texas, I can remember my mother yelling at me one day because I went to a water fountain that said white as opposed to the one that had color above it. It was such a shrill that I began to realize something is wrong with me doing what I'm about to do. My first sip of that water didn't taste any different than the other water, but I immediately ran to her, and she looked down at me. I am not going to tell you right now, but don't you ever do that again. I could tell I had done something really bad. At a young age, my mother began to tell me about how maybe I should act in certain places. When my father grew up in Lewisburg, Tennessee, that's right next door to the birth of the KKK, Pulaski. And so my father only finished the 7th grade. His father, as I have begun to look into the genealogy of the family, was a sharecropper. If you understand sharecropping back in those days, it was probably just 1 foot out of slavery. But my father was well read. He was a wise man. He did many things. He was in the segregated army. He would often say, "Son, you need to join the army. Make a man out ya." My father hustled to make sure that we made ends meet. He taught me to hunt at a very early age. And hunting was not recreation. It was subsisting to make sure we had some food on the table. Many of you probably still hunt today to subsist. Well, guess what? That's all right with me. My mom was the educated one in the family. My mother went to Tuskegee Institute. Her professors were Washington and Carver. A very rich history there at Tuskegee, now a unit of the National Park Service. The Tuskegee Airmen were from Tuskegee Institute. So my mother wanted to make sure that all of her kids, 3 of us, were going to be better than my father and her. So they did their darndest to ensure, number one, that we survive in the segregated racial South, and at the same time, we were going to be somebody. So all the education that you get from your parents, they may not think you're listening, but we know we are. My mother's voice is still in my head today, as I know many of your parents are still in your head today, to help you make good decisions. Now, how did I get to Texas A&M? Well, I was an Eagle Scout, Boy Scout in an all-black Boy Scout troop. The deacons of the church made sure that we had a troop. I was an Eagle Scout. I started on God and Country. I was Order of the Arrow and got introduced to the outdoors. But there was something even before that, was that weather and being outside was a happy place for me. I was not an indoor kid. My mother said, well, that's one thing about you, boy. You're not a hothouse plant. And I used to get in all kinds of trouble because I wanted to be outside as opposed to indoors. So I began to think about what I wanted to do here at Texas A&M, and my initial thought was I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. My mom, being a teacher, said, nope, that's not you. Do you realize how much you want to be outside doing things that you do? Yeah. So she said, you better look at something different. As she began to counsel and talk with me about my interests, she said, you love wildlife, you love being outside. That Texas A&M, that Texas Tech, that Clemson, that University of Missouri, Tuskegee, they all have programs like that. So I applied for every last one of them, was accepted. Now, why didn't I go to Tuskegee? My brother, my sister, my mom, all went to Tuskegee. My brother played football, quarterback at Tuskegee, so I was supposed to go to Tuskegee. One might say I was the white sheep of the family. My mother was a girls' high school basketball coach, so she coached us kids up. She made sure we understood that when a coach grabbed your face mask, and they did that back in the day, and saliva was flying out of their mouth as they were yelling at you because you made a mistake, and I'd come home whining. Now, this is in junior high school. I'd come home whining about the coach grabbing my face mask and spits flying in my face, and she looked at me and she said, so why are you talking to me? I says, well, shouldn't that be wrong? She goes, let me just tell you something. If you had listened to what the coach was saying, shaking the face mask and the spit flying, you might have caught a nugget or two. They may have been trying to help you understand how you could be better. So I learned to toughen up. I learned to accept that there was a path made for me, because all my ancestors, the shoulders that I stood on, paved the way for me. I was in church all the time, and I knew that my path was already laid out for me. When I prayed for certain things, but if you pray and you understand from where I'm coming, being a little subtle here, is that you know that somebody up there already know who you're going to be and what you're going to do. Instead of going to Tuskegee, there's a young lady that I met in high school, and I was kind of smitten. Now, we've been together coming up for 50 years. Woo! That young lady went to Texas Southern University. And I was thinking, well, A&M is closer than Texas Tech, really closer than Clemson and Missouri and Tuskegee. I'll go to Texas A&M. If you haven't gone through fish camp here at A&M, now that is something special, because you begin to learn about the traditions of Aggieland, the spirit of Aggieland. And during that time, it was mandatory that you had to be in the Corps. But boy, when I saw what was going on and what was happening, I prayed. Even though it was planned, but I didn't have to be in the Corps. It was no longer mandatory. Boy, I couldn't escape soon enough. Because I was thinking, those guys that played football, being students, and also in the Corps, did I admire those individuals? Because they had a way of organizing themselves in such a way that they were probably successful in every last one of those aspects of Aggieland. But I was a realist. That was not me. However, the draft during the Vietnam conflict, that was a draft. And we all got these lottery numbers. The lower your number, you're going to be going to the military. My number was 17. My dad had always said, boy, you get in the Army or the military, it'll make a man out of you. I should have known my path had already been planned for me. So I went into the military after graduating from Texas A&M. But there was one thing that happened to me here at A&M that I really appreciated, and I kind of admire myself for making this decision. Again, my path was already laid out for me. I came out of a mammalogy class as a wildlife science major, and across the hallway was this wonderful looking picture of a mountain. I later found out it was Mount Rainier, or either Grand Tetons National Park. And by there was a flyer. Dr. Leslie Reed is starting a department, Recreation Parks Administration. And I decided, well, I'm going to go to that and just see what that's all about. I did. I saw, I listened, I heard, and the rest of the story is I was one of the first graduates of this department. There were 7 of us, if I'm not mistaken. Was it 7 of us? My old professor right there. Raise your hand, Prof. But one thing A&M taught me was how to persevere. During those years, there were no African American blue chippers. Even though I had 2 Latino brothers on the team, and they were blue chippers, but my dark skin didn't qualify me as a blue chipper. So Gene Stallings was our coach at the time. And I went to Coach Stallings, and I said, I want to play football for you. And he kind of hemmed and hawed. I could tell he was a little reluctant to give me a definite answer of yes. Again, my path is laid out for me. He said yes. Wow. So I had a chance to mingle with these guys. And if you guys, some of you may remember Henderson Hall, they catered to football players. I guess because the football program, and probably still does, looking at Kyle Field, I mean, I remember playing in the horseshoe. And so the football program brings in a few bucks. And so walking on to that program, again, if you don't realize who Coach Stallings' DNA is all about, it was Bear Bryant. Coach Stallings was on the 1956 National Championship team, Bear Bryant. And if you've ever heard about the Junction Boys, Coach Stallings tried to make us Junction Boys. The reason for that, again, my path is laid out for me. Bear Bryant made sure that if you survive Junction, you're going to be a good football player at Texas A&M. So Coach Stallings made sure we're going to be some good football players here at Texas A&M. If you survive that, you could probably survive most anything. So I could very easily be bitter about a lot of things that occurred in my life, and maybe even here at A&M. But there was one area that I had an oasis where I could go and feel the love, and that was with these old professors, Recreation Parks program, Dr. Reed and his cadre of professors. And we had wonderful talks. We had little outings and events where we played guitars and drank a little beer and had a little hootenanny. You guys don't understand how black music and country music are one. Now, if you don't believe that, Ken Burns has a program now, I think it's about 8 parts, country music. If you haven't started looking at it, do look at it, because it'll tell you that we are one. My passion of giving back is all based on my path that my mother set. As I said, my path is all laid out for me, as yours as well. Everywhere I went in the National Park Service after I finished my commitment with the military and getting back in the National Park Service, you know, I think I saw a picture of my big brother here, because he's about the age of my big brother. But I saw this ranger, and he was black, and it's like, wow. And then there was a recruiter that came around to schools like Texas A&M, Clemson, Missouri, Tuskegee, whichever schools may have had a wildlife science program or a park management program, and it was a cooperative education program, and they recruited us to work during the summer. However, before that, these professors provided us with an avenue to work in city parks. I worked in Houston's Recreation Parks program. But then when those guys came from the National Park Service, I was a ranger in Everglades National Park doing anti-alligator poaching patrols. Now, I think we did such a good job that the alligators are thriving so well that maybe we need to take out a few more of those rascals. Because from what I'm reading, how they're eating dogs and cats and people, and now the pythons are eating them. So, again, getting my experience with the National Park Service. As you guys know, you can have your major in your career, whether it be in state parks, regional parks, tourism, or what have you. But I think the National Park Service mission kind of took me in. And the part of the mission that most allowed me to have passion was that piece that said to preserve and to protect, and then I'll skip over that, future generations. So from every park and every place I went, I made sure that I reached out into local communities to make national park units from wherever I worked to be an outdoor classroom. And by golly, the reward comes when some 12-year-old comes up to you and say, Ranger Reynolds, I remember 5 years ago when my parents visited you here in Yosemite, and you knelt down to me and you talked to me You had that flat hat on, and I guess I was looking pretty good in the old sincere gray and green. Check him out back there. And he said, I want to be a park ranger. That told me right there that that's the future of the National Park Service. And I will also say that's how we're going to survive the next 100 years. Because I do believe that as an organization and as an agency, not only do we have a quilt, a pattern that represents every last one of us in here and our cultures, and we have the professional individuals who are managing these national parks. I used to think that I was not ready to do it, and who was going to follow me, but I had senior citizens. He's not that senior. He's like my big brother, but I admire this man because he was a role model for so many of us, reaching back to ensure that we had opportunities. And so my task, as well as the National Park Service's task, is to reach back. So no matter what profession or career field you are in, I will say this, is that we all have a responsibility to preserve and protect, and I'm going to put it globally, Mother Earth. The National Park System is doing its best to do that with our mandate, and it doesn't matter which career field you choose. We all have to think about future generations. How clean is the water? How clean is the air? Are we protecting species in such a way that we, as the humans on this earth, with all the power that we have to protect or destroy? My message to you: how are you going to help the National Park Service meet its mission in the next 100 years? And how are you going to help protect Mother Earth for future generations? I leave that with you. And thank you, sirs, ma'ams, for allowing me, giving me the honor to hang out with my brothers and to see my old prof again. If you want me back, I'll come back. And I might even have a few more stories because I am a fourth grade teacher. And oh, by the way, Aggie football is thriving in a flag football program at a charter school, K through 8. We have won one championship. We were in a championship game last year. We didn't win. We did pretty good. And we're going to continue to support young people, because there are times when parents are working 2 and 3 jobs. Well, guess what teachers and coaches do? We're part of that community to make sure that those future generations are loved and we create wonderful environments for them to thrive. So those of you who are going to be teachers, I applaud you. God knows you're not paid enough, but your passion is such that you still go into that career field. Those of you who are professors, continue to do your thing, because you made an impression on this little black boy from Galveston. Thank you.
So the 2 law enforcement rangers are in the back. Come on up front.
Reason why I'm asking 2 of our colleagues to come up you're a student in this department or any department, I hope that you might see yourself reflected in the uniforms and all the symbolism that this uniform represents. These are two proud products of Texas A&M University. One of them is a wannabe proud Aggie grad, but close enough, good enough. There you go, close enough. Welcome. Stay there for a sec. Well, actually, for a little bit longer. It is truly a humbling experience for me to be here with this distinguished panel for a number of reasons. There are a couple of themes of interest that you may have heard reflected in what was said. The concept of family is extremely important. Faith, fortitude. The concept of pursuing causes greater than ourselves is clearly also reflected in what you just heard. As a public servant for nearly 40 years at the federal and state level, my journey too, as my brother JT articulated, was laid out before me. And I didn't know it. And every day that I have the opportunity to lead the men and women of the National Park Service and to wear this uniform is truly a blessed day. My aspirations began when my parents provided the example to my younger brother and younger sister by asking us and compelling us to pursue causes greater than ourselves. That life was more than just about us. That there had to be something more meaningful that we needed to think about doing to be productive members of society and of our country. My parents, by the causes that they undertook, social causes, provided an example of what was in the realm of possibility if we truly believed in what we wanted to achieve. That if we worked hard, that if we had a strong moral and ethical compass, everything was possible. I know I am where I am today because of that faith ethic and because of the guidance and counsel and support that they provided to their children, to their grandchildren, and to their great-grandchildren. I'm also humbled and blessed by the support provided by a kindergarten classmate of mine that later became my high school sweetheart. It took me 10 years to finally be successful. But we made it, Bob. We made it. And just recently celebrated 39 years of marriage. I will be frank, were it not for Melissa to have said yes to 12 moves around the country, I would not be standing before you today as the first Latino Deputy Director of the National Park Service. Our two children are other blessings that sustain us. Both graduates of this university, both successful contributors to society, who've also taken on the responsibility of pursuing causes greater than themselves. And now, the additional blessing of 6 grandkids. In the audience today, I have nieces and cousins that are here as well. And you honor me by your presence here today. What you also see reflected in this panel are a series of firsts. The very first African American director of the National Park Service. the very first Latino chief ranger at Castillo de San Marcos National Monument. The first African American to play football at Texas A&M University. So if you take away anything from this panel, it is I hope that you'll take away that with a strong moral and ethical compass, with the notion that I can pursue causes greater than myself, that I can achieve anything that I set out to achieve. My mission, my vision in pursuing my dream was realized on a chance trip to Yellowstone National Park in the late 1960s. And what is so interesting about this is that the first park that we stopped along that journey was Grand Teton National Park, his first park experience. 40 plus years later, and all it took was one national park experience, I became the 21st superintendent of that very park that changed my life. One park, one experience, that's all it took. And I'm sure that these rangers will tell you, in their own words, what it means to finally put on this uniform, our nation's uniform, and to protect our nation's most special places and all the stories that they contain, and to get paid to do it, and to live in places like the Everglades, like Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon, and to wake up to those majestic landscapes every single day. To lead programs as Jim does in the Rails to Trails program, which works with partners, in this case Amtrak, to connect parks and communities together. And to other program offices that we have reflected and that are partners with the RPTS program. I have the honor of overseeing 419 units of the National Park Service in every state in the country, in all the U.S. territories. Over 22,000 employees and a budget of $3 billion. No pressure. I got this. What an honor. And as Bob will tell you, when you walk into the Director's Quarter in Washington, D.C., there are two panels that reflect the names of the lives of the men and women of the National Park Service who paid the ultimate sacrifice in the line of duty. And if that doesn't motivate you to bring your A game to Washington every day, I don't know what does. Because that board reminds us of who the true treasures of the National Park Service are. It's the men and women who work and serve, and again, who have ultimately laid their life down in the line of duty. It's the volunteers, our seasonal employees, that make sure that your children's children will have grizzly bears to see and experience in Glacier National Park and in Yellowstone National Park. I have the honor of leading this organization, as Anthony referenced, into a second century. Now, what does that mean? I'll just give you a quick example. When JT and I were law enforcement rangers back in the 70s and 80s, probably the most challenging things we'd have to deal with were wrestling with alligator poachers, maybe some marijuana growers. The law enforcement rangers today, the men and women who wear proudly this uniform, deal with domestic terrorism, human and drug smuggling in units of the National Park System. It's not what you would normally think about in a national park. We've been around for 103 years. The values that have served us for those years still remain critical and important. but our practices and our protocols and our training must and will reflect the times. They have to. To the professors that are here, as with JT, my same professors, what we teach the students today, and we are partners in this, will need to continue to reflect the realities of what it means to be a manager of public lands at the local level, the regional level, the state level, and the national level. It is important that we have conversations about what we're going to need in a second century workforce, the issues that we're going to ask you to deal with, to address the impacts of a warming climate. Tragically, the most recent hurricane, I received a report before I left Washington yesterday. At Cape Hatteras, I've completely lost facilities, wiped off their footprint. Every government vehicle that I had on the island of Cape Hatteras was destroyed, personal vehicles. We had to send in teams to come in to provide generators so that they can make the damage assessments that I need so I can go to Congress and seek financial support. The impacts of climate are critical, and it's something that we are focusing on now. Visitor experience, over 300 million visitors to our nation's national parks. I saw a report, got a briefing the other day, by the year 2040, the national parks will incur and experience 200 million more visitors. 500 million visitors, Lou, by the year 2040. Where do we put them? Can we ensure that, Bob, they have the experience that current visitors have today by the year 2040? What is their life going to look like when it comes to protecting these very resources? These aren't challenges. These are opportunities. Opportunities also for the National Park Service to make itself relevant to you, who are going to be making these decisions, wearing these uniforms, and protecting our nation's national heritage. We hope to make ourselves relevant to you. In the National Park Service, I've made it very clear. We are going after the kids, to JT's point. We are going to make ourselves relevant to you. We're going to provide you with a home, a place to serve your country. And that's true at the federal level, whether it's the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, the United States Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, the state level, because my generation, the baby boomer generation, is exiting out. We have to prepare the next generation today. A second century park service requires it. In the coming months, we are going to begin an opportunity to celebrate this nation. The 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence is July 4th, 2026. Your National Park Service is going to be leading the effort to commemorate all that that means. We are going to tell the stories that have not been told, and they're difficult stories. Just of the generations reflected here, and I also am the proud oldest grandchild of a sharecropper. Just within our generations, you've heard examples of some difficult times growing up. But there are also those stories that have yet to be told of who helped to found our nation, how, why, and we will tell them. Because it's important that we know and value what makes up our DNA as Americans. So I am excited about the future. I'm optimistic. Yesterday, I was on the top of the Washington Monument, because today, with the help of the First Lady of the United States, we are reopening the Washington Monument today. And I wish you have a chance to see that view. And as you scan around the horizons of our nation's capital, from the United States Capitol, the White House, the Lincoln Memorial, and the Potomac River, I hope that you will find a sense of pride, as I do every time I go up to that place. Every time I gaze, as I will next week, at the majestic landscape of the Grand Tetons or in the Grand Canyon, the pride of what it means to live in this country, to be a part of the fabric and tapestry of this country, and hopefully one day help to protect and preserve its most special places. Thank you.
Bob, Anthony, JT, David, we thank you all very much. It's an amazing presentation. You guys have shared some incredible wisdom with us, and we thank you for that. I'd like to keep you up here for just a minute if I could. I'm going to take care of a little bit of business, and then I do want to spend just a few minutes with some question and answers if we have time. But before we do that, I would like to ask, one of the things that all these guys talked about was their experience here at Texas A&M and what the department and other departments on this campus did for them as a part of their education. Well, as a part of this event today, we had a group of students in a class that helped to put this event on, went through all the planning last semester and then all the implementation this semester. And I'd like to ask the group of students who's here, who are the planning group that really are the organizers of this, to please come here to the front, make your way to the front. And I want to show them off a little bit as the group who put this on. Thank you all very much for your hard work in making all this happen. This is an example of what we like to say here at Texas A&M, the high-impact experiences that we offer in our department. And these young people made this thing happen. They are really the reason we're here. So thank you all very much. Let's give another. All right, thank you so much, y'all. You could stand up here a long time, couldn't you? Lots of pictures. Okay, now, so what we said a little while ago, before these gentlemen started in, was that we'd have time for maybe a few questions. Is there anybody who would like to start us out with a question? We've got some microphones available. We'd like to have you take a microphone and ask a question, and maybe we'll just have a little bit of discussion here before we break up. Anybody willing to do that? Oh, come on, I'm going to stand here quietly. Oh, there's Dr. Crompton, of course, yes.
Mr. Vela, you said that we're going to have 200 million more people, visitors to the national parks. I suspect many of them are going to be of the vintage of my vintage, because people are retiring younger, they have discretionary income, and they can get there. The problem with you guys at the national parks is that you don't allow me to walk from one hut to another. I can no longer carry the pack on my back, and I have no interest at all in sleeping on the ground. Now, if I go to the Southern Alps of New Zealand, and I go hiking on their tracks, then I go from one lodge to another lodge to another lodge down the trail every 10 miles or so, and I get a first-class bed at night, and I don't have to cart my stuff. If I go to the alpine huts in Austria or Switzerland, the same deal. I get a meal, I get cooked, and so on. Why can't you open the national parks to that experience?
Yeah, why can't you people in the park?
There are choices that we give all of our constituents. When I worked in Yosemite, there are places. Now, whether you want to call it a 5-star roughing it deluxe, no. But you will have a roof over your head, and you're probably going to have to walk a little bit. But don't you know that that is a prescription from your doctor that says exercise?
No,
Nobody wants that one. That's a hot potato. Huh? Thank you, Dr. Compton. Dr. Walker, did you have a question?
We're a very urbanizing population, and majority of our youth in urban areas don't have access to green space and don't have national park or even municipal park experiences. And I'm just curious, I work more with municipal parks, but I also love working with the national parks. And I'm curious how y'all see us working together to kind of resolve and address those issues.
the question of access or equity relative to the availability of outdoor cultural resource experiences, it's interesting to take a look at the growth of the national park system. There has been a direct attempt on the part of the American people through their elected and appointed official to make parks readily accessible. It was pretty much the conception of parks years and years ago that they need to be large, naturally resource-oriented parks, primarily Midwest, out west. But that changed and continues to change. Witness, if you will, major recreational areas that have outstanding natural and cultural resources qualities. Chattahoochee in the city limits of Atlanta, Golden Gate in the vicinity of San Francisco, Golden Gateway in New York, Chattahoochee between Akron and Cleveland, Ohio, readily accessible to those who want to walk, bike, or whatever into these natural areas. And I believe that the Park Service working jointly with the states and their political subdivision relative to outdoor recreation are developing a network that would allow all citizens to have immediate access. Certainly there's encouragement on the part of the Park Service and allied organizations to provide encouragement and opportunities for those who may live in Brooklyn, New York, to get to Grand Teton National Park. And some perhaps never will have the economic wherewithal to fly or to drive or to take Amtrak, if you will, in the vicinity of these parks. But those parks will always be available to them. But by the same token, parks are being taken to the people, if you will, in terms of where they live.
If I could expand upon just at the local level, our park is located in the middle of a city in St. Augustine, Florida, and so we are one of the biggest green spaces, and so we try to find ways to take advantage of that. So last year, for instance, we held the first ever movie night at the fort. So we rented a giant inflatable screen and showed the movie Coco, and we were able to connect that message to the purpose of why our park was established. And so it was a great community event. We were going to do another one, and then Hurricane Dorian shut us down. But those are the opportunities that I think that us as park managers continue to seek out and look forward to working with our local community to expand that access.
Yeah, JT reminded me too, not only national parks, but we have program offices that try to make those connections with local communities. Our Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program is one that works with local communities to build and support outdoor recreational opportunities as one of a number of examples. So a lot of people don't think of the Park Service and our program offices, but they're equally important that help facilitate quality of life around the country in a positive way.
I would also like to share that at many of our national parks, we have youth outreach programs where we go into local communities, and some of us even go a little bit further than the boundaries of the units from where we work. And that we're reaching into school systems to ensure that these parks are used as outdoor classrooms. What we have all learned is that everyone does not learn the same way. And so what may be in a science book, and I'll give you an example, a drawing of a fault system, and then you take them into an outdoor area where you can actually show them up close and personal the geology and the fault system there. And what we have found out in talking with their teachers as they return to school is that they are now better learners. They have had an opportunity to see something up close and personal, and now they can understand. And we also have programs where we are training teachers in such a way that the teachers can come on their own as opposed to having a ranger to meet them in the park. And I know there are other ways that we assist. Is that I know from where I worked, I made sure that there was funding to get school systems to the parks, because many times school systems don't have the money to get the kids out to parks. So we in the National Park Service have done many things to support school systems, train their teachers, and to get these kids out. And if we're going to do an overnight, create a cache of equipment, because many of them don't have that either. And so we find all kinds of ways to do this. And it's kind of nice also to have those partners, whether it be State Park, whether it be BLM, or even just school systems, to work in concert with us to ensure that those outdoor classrooms are utilized.
Are there any questions? We got time for one more question, I think.
I
Yes.
have one.
Here's one right here.
Yeah, I have a question. With the threat of climate change increasing every day, how will we manage our resources in our wildlands and national parks if the baseline of the management is set around the natural vegetation that we decided upon 100, 200, 500 years ago, and in the next 100 years, it's not going to be able to look like that, and we're not going to be able to manage it in that same way that we have been in the past 100 years?
One of the things that in the second century National Park Service that we're spending quite a bit of time is exactly assessing what are those impacts. I do sleep at night. I lose sleep at night wondering whether the Everglades and that river of grass will be around 30 years from now because of rising sea levels and brackish waters, JT, coming into the Everglades. Right now, because of rising tides, I'm losing cultural and archaeological resources, Bob, in our national seashores, as an example, Cape Lookout being one of those examples. Just now in cities like Charleston, where we have Civil War sites, just normal flooding cycles are taking water levels higher than what we've ever seen, thereby impacting not only the visitor experience, but the economies of tourism, as an example. So these are real-world, real-time impacts that the managers and superintendents of today have to address. The reality is that what's causing it, that's someone else's conversation. What I have to do in the Park Service is mitigate the impacts. And you know, the big decision that we're going to have to make in Cape Hatteras right now is not whether we're going to rebuild, but how much can we rebuild? Knowing that if I invest millions of dollars in infrastructure, I could lose it in the next hurricane season and in the next hurricane season. These are the critical decisions that we as a nation are going to need to continue to have conversations about.
I'd just like to echo David's comments. But one of the things that comes out of natural disasters are the phenomenal change called climate change, talk about invasive species, et cetera, is the critical importance and the benefits that derive from collaboration and cooperation. The Park Service cannot operate as an independent federal agency. We're not conversing with the Forest Service at the state or the local level of the Bureau of Land Management. All have to be a partnership approach to stewardship of our collective natural and cultural resources. And I've seen great examples in which we talk to each other across these artificial boundaries or these artificial organizational structures that unless you have that team approach, none of us are going to be successful in combating the adverse impact of these natural changes in our environment. So I would just encourage you as you study stewardship of resources in the classroom or field trips, what have you, that ultimately you would have to engage in collaboration and cooperation with like-minded and sometimes non-like-minded individuals and organizations. And that's the only way we're going to proceed. And to Dr. Schaefer, I think I owe you an apology. I only gave you Dr. Scott and Dr. Schaefer. But you're still the department chair, I think.
I answer to anything, Bob. Anything.
Okay, I know. Thank you.
That's an excellent point, Dr. Stanton. Collaboration, cooperation, and I hope it's something that you all are learning in every aspect of your education. We're not going to do anything by ourselves. I'm going to call it there. I know there are more questions, and I know we also have an opportunity afterward, for those of you who can stay, to have some food and to stay and visit with these gentlemen on a one-on-one basis if you'd like to. I know they'd love to see you. They really have expressed to me many times how glad they are to be here engaging with students, and this was our point, was to get them back here so that you all could learn from them. They represent, as you can tell, a wealth of knowledge and experience, both from the past and in looking forward. And I thank you all again. I want to give you a big round of applause. Again, thank you so much. All right, we'll consider ourselves dismissed. Enjoy some food. Thank you all for coming.